It didn't begin with a light in the sky. It began with silence. Not the kind that fills a quiet room, but the kind that presses against your skin. A pressure, a presence. That's what I felt the moment the forest went still. No birds, no wind, not even the distant hum of insects. Just a thick, absolute stillness. Like the world itself had been paused. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 35, a former botanist, an amateur hiker, and, until that night, a complete skeptic. If you'd asked me then whether I believed in aliens or the divine or anything beyond molecules and evolution, I would have smiled politely and offered you a copy of Carl Sagan's Cosmos. That version of me died on a trail in northern Oregon, August 19, 2023. And something else was born in her place. I had gone into the forest alone, something I'd done 100 times before. I wasn't a thrill seeker. I wasn't running from anything. I just loved the trees, the way they breathed, the way they aged. I used to say forests were my version of church. Funny how literal that would become. I parked my Subaru just before dusk and started up the trail, planning to spend the night at Fire Ridge Lookout. I had my pack, my GPS, my journal. Everything was routine. Until I reached the second switchback and the sound of nature dropped out like a radio losing signal. Then the sky cracked. I don't know how else to describe it. A sudden burst of light, not white, not yellow, but alive. Like a pulse of translucent color you feel more than see. I looked up, shielding my eyes, and that's when I saw it. A shape descending. Not a saucer, not a cliché. It looked almost organic, like it had grown into its form. Petal-like wings of soft gold, a body that shimmered like dew under moonlight, and movement that defied inertia. It hovered above the ridge, completely silent, and I stood there with my mouth open, my legs frozen. Then it moved toward me. Not fast, not aggressive. It drifted. A slow, precise drift, like a feather riding an unseen current. I wanted to run, I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Not because I was paralyzed, but because something deeper in me, something ancient, whispered, "Wait." A beam of light. Again, not a beam like from a flashlight or sci-fi movie. This was soft, gentle, like fog filled with stars. It engulfed me. And the moment it touched my skin, I remembered something I'd never known before. A place, a garden. Not metaphorical, not mythical, real. I wasn't transported instantly, no. The abduction wasn't a snatch and vanish. It was a layering. The world I stood in peeled back, like a page lifting from a book, and underneath it was something else, something truer. My senses blurred. The forest around me dissolved into a vision of impossible beauty. Rolling hills of translucent green, trees that glowed faintly with an inner warmth, flowers that sang, not with sound, but emotion. I could feel their joy, their worship. Yes, worship. Everything here was alive in a way our world only imitates. Then I heard the voice. It didn't come from the ship. It came from within and beyond me at once. You have been chosen to remember, to bear witness. The garden was never lost. It was hidden, not for man, but for him. And then I saw it. The Garden of Eden. Not a story, not a symbol. A place. But not on Earth. Not in the way we think of Earth. This garden was elsewhere, tucked between dimensions, protected by something I would later come to understand only as the fold. It was then that I truly began to believe. Not in aliens, not in angels, but in something bigger, something that held both science and spirit in its hands like twin strands of the same DNA. They didn't take me onto the ship. They took me through it. As I stepped into its light, the ship became less a vessel and more a veil, like a doorway between versions of existence. On the other side, gravity felt different. My thoughts came faster. Colors shifted as I looked at them. I don't know how long I was there. Minutes? Days? Time works differently in Eden. And yes, they called it Eden. The beings, not gray-skinned abductors, but luminous figures of soft light, never named themselves. But they were gardeners, not creators, not gods. They tended this place, preserved it, not just for nostalgia, for prophecy. "You are not here to believe," one of them said. "You are here to remember." That's when the memories began. Not mine, ours, humanity's. They weren't visions, they were downloads, experiences. I became Adam, I became Eve even the serpent, not to relive sin, but to understand context, motive, misinterpretation. And then, at the heart of it all, I saw him, Jesus, not crucified, not preaching, gardening. Yes, he was tending the soil with his bare hands, whispering to a blooming tree that glowed with such intensity I had to look away. He looked up, and he saw me. He smiled, and what he said, what he showed me next, is why I'm telling you this story. Because Eden isn't a myth. It's a message. And everything you thought you knew about faith, salvation, and the stars above is just the beginning. Jesus knelt in the garden, not on a cross, not in a temple, not in agony, but in communion. He moved with the plants as if they were extensions of himself, and they responded. Trees leaned, flowers shimmered. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath when he touched the soil. I couldn't look away. He was radiant, but not blinding, humble, but impossibly powerful. His presence was gravity. It pulled me, not with force, but with familiarity, as if every molecule in my body had been missing him and only now remembered. And then he stood, walked toward me. My knees gave out, but he caught me before I hit the ground, not with hands, with grace. I can't describe it better than that. It felt like falling into peace. "Stand, Emily," he said, not with his mouth, but with his presence. "You do not bow here. You grow." That sentence still echoes in me, because Eden was not a paradise of leisure. It was a garden of becoming. We walked together, Jesus and I, through fields of light and memory. He didn't preach, he planted. Seeds of understanding, questions, not answers. "What you call God," he said, "is not a king in the sky. It is the soil in which all spirit grows." I asked him, through my trembling thoughts, "Is this heaven?" "No," he said gently. "This is the echo of your origin. Heaven is not a place. It is a state, a frequency." He waved his hand, and suddenly I could see it. Threads of light pulsing from the ground, from the trees, from us. Everything was connected, humming at different levels of truth. He called it the lattice. Faith, he explained, is resonance. When you believe purely, without doubt, you tune yourself to the divine frequency. Miracles are not gifts, they are harmonics. I asked him about prayer. "You were never meant to beg," he said. "You were meant to align." At one point, he touched a tree and said, "This is the original tree of life, not of good and evil, but of remembrance." And then the memory hit me like thunder. I wasn't just visiting Eden. I had been here before. In some other form, some distant lifetime, I was part of the first garden. I had left, like all of us, not in punishment, but in pursuit of growth. Earth was never exile. It was the next garden, the denser one, the harder one, the training ground. Eden was hidden, Jesus told me, not to punish, but to protect. You weren't ready to hold this memory until now. He gestured to a pond that reflected not light, but moments, scenes from Earth's history, wars, healings, births, deaths, and woven through them all, the presence of something watching, guiding, waiting. "The divine never left you," he said. "You left yourselves. And you're almost ready to return." At some point, I realized the beings, the luminous gardeners, were not watching us anymore. They were watching me. As if I was being evaluated, measured, not for worthiness, but for readiness. And then Jesus said something that cracked my heart open. Tell them what you saw, even if they mock you, especially then. I wanted to ask why, but he answered before I formed the thought. Because you never believed, and that makes your witness unshakable. He smiled, and I felt it, not just in my mind, but in the very fabric of who I am, a light threading through every wound I'd ever carried. Then he stepped back. The garden began to fade. The light pulled again. Not harsh, just final. And I woke up, not in the forest, in my bed, at home, with dirt on my feet and the scent of impossible flowers in my hair. I didn't move for hours. I lay in bed, sheets tangled around me, the morning light bleeding through the curtains, and just stared. Not because I didn't believe what had happened, because I did, fully, deeply, with every breath. I had been there. I had seen him. But how do you return from that? How do you walk into a kitchen and make coffee after standing in the presence of Jesus, not the icon, not the myth, but the gardener of the original Eden? How do you go back to work, to errands, to small talk? You don't. Not really. Eventually, I moved, slowly. I stood, and immediately my legs buckled, not from weakness, from resonance. They hummed, a faint vibration through my bones, like I was still partially tethered to that other world. When I touched the floor, it felt off, not wrong, but denser. Like gravity here pulled harder, light dimmed faster, sound echoed too late. I reached for my journal and stopped cold. My hiking boots, still muddy, sat beside the bed. The same ones I had worn into the forest, still laced, still wet. But I had driven to the trailhead, parked miles away. I hadn't walked home. I hadn't walked anywhere. And yet, here they were, caked with soil that shimmered faintly like crushed pearl in sunlight. I scooped some of it into a glass vial I kept on my dresser, a habit from years of fieldwork. I would test it later, I thought, analyze it. But deep down, I already knew this was not earth soil. My phone had 17 missed calls, texts from friends, my boss, my sister. Where are you? Emily, it's been 2 days. Please call me. I'm calling the police. 2 days. Gone. I was missing for 48 hours. But to me, it felt like maybe 6, 8 hours. Time really did work differently there. I thought of calling someone, explaining. But what could I say? Hi, sorry for the scare. I got abducted, met Jesus, and now I resonate with celestial frequencies. Also, I brought back some divine soil. Coffee later? No, not yet. I needed proof. And that's when I remembered the mark. I lifted the hem of my shirt and checked my side, just above the hip bone. There it was, a small circular scar, faint but unmistakable. It hadn't been there before, and it wasn't natural. The skin shimmered slightly, like light caught beneath it. Not a tattoo, not a burn, something else, a seal. I touched it, and for a split second, I saw the garden again, felt the wind through trees that shouldn't exist, heard the hum of living things that spoke without words, and the voice, his voice, echoed again in my mind. This is your return path. Not metaphorical, literal. The rest of the day passed like a dream I was only half awake for. I wandered my apartment, touched familiar things as if seeing them for the first time. And everywhere I went, I felt watched. Not in fear, in invitation. As if the garden was always just behind the fabric of things, waiting. I opened my journal and wrote 2 words. It's real. Then I began to write everything. every moment, every detail. Because what I saw, what he showed me, wasn't just for me. It was for all of us. And if you're hearing this now, it's because you were meant to hear it. Because this story isn't about abduction. It's about awakening.
The next morning, I went to church. I hadn't been in years, not since I was a teenager and asked the pastor why Jesus cursed the fig tree, and he called it an act of divine symbolism. That's when I knew I wasn't going to find answers in pews. But that morning, I didn't go for answers. I went to observe, to feel, to compare what I had seen, the real Jesus, the gardener of the lattice, to what we had made him into. It was painful. People sang, they raised their hands, they wept. But the air was hollow. Their prayers didn't rise, they spiraled, collapsing in on themselves like whispers trapped in a bottle. The pastor spoke of sin, of repentance, of a kingdom far away, waiting for the worthy. But I had stood in that kingdom, and it wasn't waiting. It was growing. Inside us, around us, here, now. After the service, I stayed seated while the crowd filtered out. An old woman in a floral hat sat beside me. "You're not from here, are you?" she said. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Not here," she repeated, tapping her temple. "You've seen beyond." I stared at her. Her eyes shimmered faintly, just like the soil, just like the mark. And then she smiled knowingly. "Don't worry," she whispered. "The others will find you soon." I went home shaken. What others? What had she seen? Who was she? I barely slept. And when I did drift off, I dreamed not of the garden itself, but of its memory. Petals falling upward, a vine wrapping gently around a star, Jesus humming to a field of glowing wheat that bent as if in prayer. Each morning I woke with tears in my eyes, not from sorrow, from longing. Then, on the third night after my return, it happened. I was writing in my journal when my lights flickered, once, twice, then stayed off. My apartment went silent, not just dark, still, like the forest before the ship. Then came the chime. Not a knock, not a voice. A single harmonic note, somewhere between a bell and a heartbeat. I opened the door. No one was there. But at my feet, a white envelope. Inside it, a single card, handwritten. It read, "You saw Eden. We need to talk. Midnight, Lookout Ridge." There was no signature, just a faint symbol in the corner. A circle within a triangle within a star. And beneath it, etched faintly in gold ink, "The fold remembers." I should have been afraid. Instead, I felt clarity. I was not alone. Others had seen it too. The garden wasn't a dream. It was a network, and it was waking up. I left for Lookout Ridge just before 11 p.m. The same ridge where I had first seen the ship. But this time I wasn't being pulled. I was returning. The air was colder than it should have been for late August. No wind, no clouds. Just that vast, starlit silence hanging over the treetops like a held breath. I parked, killed the headlights, and stepped out onto the trail with only a flashlight and the card in my pocket. The strange symbol on the bottom seemed to hum faintly against my leg, as if proximity to this place activated it. By the time I reached the overlook, it was 11:58. There was no one there. Just the mountain, the stars, and that impossible stillness. I waited. Then, just as the second hand ticked over to midnight, I heard footsteps behind me. Not clumsy, measured. And when I turned, there were 3 of them. 2 women, 1 man. all in plain clothes, no uniforms, no weapons, just presence. The man spoke first. He looked older, late 60s maybe, but his eyes burned with youth. "You're the Carter witness," he said. I nodded slowly. The woman to his left smiled. "Welcome back," she said. "You've been missed." And then the other one, the youngest, maybe my age, stepped forward and said something that shattered the last wall of doubt I didn't even know I still had. "You saw him in the garden, didn't you? Not teaching, not preaching, planting." I felt my knees give again, but I didn't fall. The man caught me with a steady hand and whispered, "You're not crazy. You're part of the lattice now." We sat in a circle on the cold earth. No fire, just starlight. And they told me everything. They were part of a hidden network, keepers of the fold. People who had, through dream, vision, or contact, seen glimpses of Eden, of the real Jesus, of the frequency that pulses behind all things. They called themselves the Rememberers. Not a cult, not a sect, a signal. Each of them had been marked. Each of them had been chosen not for their strength, but for their openness, for their brokenness. "We were fractured," the younger woman said, "so we could resonate more clearly." And when she said that, I realized that's what Eden really is. Not a reward, a reminder of what we were before shame, before separation, before systems and scripture diluted the divine into dogma. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small vial. Inside it, soil like mine, glowing faintly, humming at a frequency my bones recognized. He handed it to me. "It's not just soil," he said. "It's memory, DNA of the original design." I looked at him. "What do we do with it?" His eyes locked on mine. "We plant it."
Plant it. Those two words echoed through me with a gravity I couldn't explain. "You mean literally?" I asked. The older man nodded. "Yes, but not in just any soil. It has to be ready, harmonized." "Harmonized how?" He tapped his chest. "With you." The younger woman leaned in. "You're still vibrating from contact. The Eden frequency. The memory you carry acts as a tuning fork. If you plant the seed with clear intention in a place of silence and truth, it'll take root. And when it does," she hesitated, then whispered, "it calls him." I felt my breath catch. "You mean Jesus?" "Not the symbol, not the story," she said. "The presence, the gardener. He responds to resonance." We walked through the forest together in silence, deeper into the ridge than I'd ever gone. Eventually, we reached a small clearing ringed by ancient cedars. The moonlight filtered through like a cathedral window, falling in geometric shapes onto the moss-covered ground. "This is where I planted mine," the older man said, pointing to a patch of unnaturally vibrant grass. "It grew," the younger woman said, "and when it bloomed, he came." My hands trembled as I reached for my vial. The soil inside was still glowing, still humming. I knelt in the moss, and the others stepped back, giving me space. "Say what you remember," the second woman said softly, out loud. I closed my eyes. I remembered his smile, his hands in the earth, the wind that listened, the prayer that wasn't a request, but a thank you. And then I said it. I remember Eden. I remember the garden, and I remember that he planted me too. I dug a small hole with my fingers, poured the glowing soil into it, covered it gently, and then nothing. No light, no sound, just silence, but a different silence, anticipatory, like the moment before a seed cracks, or before a voice speaks the first word of Genesis. The man placed a hand on my shoulder. "It'll take time," he said. "It always does." "But when it flowers," said the woman with the shimmer in her eyes, "you'll know, because the veil will thin. And the gardener will return," the younger one added. We sat in that clearing for hours. No one spoke. The stars moved slowly overhead. And I knew something deeper than belief. I knew that Eden wasn't history. It was a signal, broadcasting, waiting. And we, those who remember, are the receivers. Dawn found us still in the clearing. The forest was soaked with gold light, and the dew on the moss looked like 1,000 small suns. The three others stood quietly, heads slightly bowed. It wasn't a ceremony, not exactly, more like they were listening for something beneath the ordinary noise of morning. Then the old man smiled. "Do you hear it?" At first, I didn't. Then I realized he didn't mean sound. He meant a feeling, a faint warmth in the center of the chest, like the heartbeat of the ground itself. "The garden answers slowly," he said, "when it recognizes one of its own." They left before sunrise, vanishing down the trail with the ease of people who'd walked it 100 times. I promised to come back, and I did, every day. The waiting. Nothing happened for a week. No glow, no voice, just a patch of soil that looked like any other. But the longer I stayed, the more I noticed everything else. The trees near the clearing started to green early. The air always smelled faintly of rain, even on dry days. Animals moved differently there, calmer, unafraid. One morning, I placed my hand on the soil and whispered the same words he'd told me in the garden. "Grow." And something answered, a pulse under my palm, subtle but unmistakable. That night I dreamed again. I was back in the garden, only smaller, close to the ground, surrounded by roots. The voice spoke, calm and near. "What you plant outside must also root within." I woke up gasping, my hand over the mark on my side. It was warm, almost hot. When I lifted my shirt, faint lines of light radiated from it, thin veins of gold tracing outward like branches. For the first time, I understood. The seed wasn't only in the earth, it was in me. The first bloom. 3 days later, it happened. I reached the ridge before dawn, same as always. The clearing shimmered faintly in the half-light. And there, where I had buried the glowing soil, a single stem had risen overnight, translucent, trembling, giving off a light like candle flames seen through water. It wasn't a normal plant. The petals looked half solid, half energy. The air around it bent slightly, as if the world couldn't decide whether to reveal or hide it. When I knelt beside it, the mark on my side pulsed again. And in my mind, softly, the gardener's voice. "Every Eden begins with one who remembers." I fell to my knees. Tears, gratitude, fear, all at once. And somewhere behind me, hidden in the whisper of wind through cedar needles, I heard another sound. Footsteps. I turned, but saw only shadows. Still, I knew I wasn't alone. The rememberers were watching, and maybe something else was too. The bloom didn't die. That's what struck me first. Every other flower I'd ever studied, no matter how vibrant, how rare, had a cycle, a window of life. But this one, it stayed, day after day, never wilting, never fading, as if it wasn't living on sunlight and soil, but on memory. By the 5th day, it began to hum, not audibly, energetically. I could feel it, like a low-frequency vibration in my bones. And every time I stood near it, the mark on my side glowed faintly, syncing with that resonance. That was the second sign. The third came with the wind. It shifted, literally. The air around the bloom stopped following the rules. Breezes bent around it. Leaves didn't land on it. Rain evaporated before touching its petals. And then something even stranger. One morning I found prints near the bloom. Not human, three-toed, deep, precise, and not leading to the flower, but away from it, as if something had already been here, watching or answering. I called the rememberers. No answer. No texts, no email, nothing. It was like they'd vanished. And then the dream started again. Only this time, I wasn't alone. The first night, I was standing in the garden again, but I wasn't just watching Jesus tend the earth. I was beside him, planting. He handed me a seed that pulsed like a heartbeat and said, "This one remembers water." I placed it into the soil, and the moment it touched earth, I remembered water. Not drinking it, being it. Fluid, flowing, carrying memory through everything I touched. I woke up drenched in sweat, hands trembling. The next night, it happened again. Same garden, different element. Fire. He handed me a branch still glowing with heat and said, "This one remembers light." And when I held it, I became light. Not symbolic, literal. I saw the structure of everything, how thought becomes energy, how energy becomes form, how form returns to thought again. Eden was not a place of comfort, Jesus said in the dream. It was a classroom. When I awoke, my bedside mirror had cracked from heat, but the room wasn't hot. My body temperature was normal. Only the air near my chest, where the mark glowed, was still warm to the touch. I began to realize the dreams weren't just dreams. They were activations. The third night brought air. I stood at the edge of the garden. A storm gathered. He handed me a feather and whispered, "This one remembers the word." I held it, and the sky opened. Words poured out, not spoken, but sung, vibrating the fabric of the dream itself. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was breath. When I woke that time, I couldn't speak. Not for 3 hours. Not a sound. My voice had vanished. And in its place, clarity. A silence so powerful it felt sacred. The kind of silence the garden spoke through. And that's when I knew. The next step wasn't to wait. It was to return. But this time, not through the ship, through the bloom.
The bloom pulsed brighter with each visit. By now it had grown to nearly a foot tall. Its petals unfurled in slow, deliberate patterns, never the same twice. One day it resembled a rose made of glass. The next, a spiral of iridescent leaves spinning ever so slightly, as if responding to the Earth's rotation. But it was the color that changed me. Not because it shifted, but because I began to feel it. It wasn't visual anymore. It was emotional. Each hue carried a frequency: joy, sorrow, curiosity, awe. And standing near the bloom was like walking through a museum of God's original intentions. I wasn't just remembering Eden, I was becoming it. Then one morning I found something else. A stone, flat, smooth, and placed directly beside the bloom. It hadn't been there the day before. Etched into its surface was a single word: enter. I ran my fingers over the letters. They glowed faintly under my touch. Then the ground vibrated. Not the earth, me. The mark on my side pulsed 3 times. The air shimmered, and for a moment reality bent, just slightly, like heat rising from pavement. The bloom tilted toward me, releasing a puff of golden pollen that didn't float. It hovered, forming a small ring before slowly falling toward the ground. And when it touched the soil, something opened. It was like the space beneath the bloom unfolded into itself. Not a hole, a passage. Flat at first, just a shimmer, a distortion, but then it began to deepen, stretching downward into a tunnel of light that spiraled like a double helix. And at the bottom, just visible through the folds of golden air, the garden, my garden. I stepped forward, not out of courage, out of inevitability, the way seeds move toward sunlight. And the moment the sole of my shoe crossed the pollen ring, I fell. Not fast, not far, just inward, through myself, through memory, through the lattice of everything I had forgotten. And then, silence, weightlessness, then gravity, soft and warm, like the first breath after birth. I stood, barefoot, on soil that glowed like the last light of sunset. And I was there again, not in a dream, not in a memory, back, in Eden. Only this time, I wasn't alone. Not just the gardeners, not just Jesus. Others, hundreds of them, standing, waiting, watching me arrive. And at their center, a familiar figure, kneeling in the soil, smiling, planting. Jesus didn't speak at first. He just smiled. That same gentle, knowing smile I'd seen in the first vision, the one that carried galaxies behind it and still felt as personal as a whispered secret. His hands were buried wrist-deep in glowing soil. Beside him, a small pile of seeds like droplets of liquid pearl shimmered softly in the light. He patted the earth and stood. And the crowd behind him, these others who had returned, parted to form a circle around us. They said nothing, but they knew why I was here, and I did too. Jesus reached into the pile and lifted one seed. It floated above his palm, rotating slowly. "This one is yours." He stepped forward and placed it into my hands. It felt warm, alive, like holding a promise. "Do you know what it contains?" he asked. I shook my head. "It remembers humanity." He gestured toward a new patch of earth at the center of the circle. "Plant it here." I knelt, trembling. The soil was softer than anything I'd ever touched, like memory, like breath, like light made tangible. I placed the seed in, covered it, and when I pressed my hand to the ground, everything changed. I saw Earth, not just as it is, but as it was meant to be. I saw cities built in harmony with oceans. I saw energy flowing freely from the planet's core to crystal towers that healed instead of harm. I saw children born with memories still intact. And I saw us, all of us, returning, not to Eden, but to ourselves. The crowd began to hum, a low, rising tone that vibrated through the garden like a wave of awakening. And the soil beneath my hand warmed. From it, a shoot emerged, faster than any plant should grow. In seconds, it became a tree, twisting upward with golden bark and leaves like translucent glass. And in its branches, images, moving like film projected through living light. My life, moments I had forgotten, moments I had denied, moments I had regretted, all of them held with love, no judgment, just integration. And as I watched, I understood. This was not about salvation. This was about wholeness. Jesus stepped beside me. "You see now?" he said. I turned to him, tears streaming. "It's all inside us." He nodded. "It always was. Eden was never locked, only lost. And the key," he tapped my chest, "was always yours." Then he touched the tree. Its leaves shimmered once, twice, and began to fall. Each leaf as it touched the ground dissolved into light and rose again, back into the lattice, back into the field, back into everything. And then He looked at me with that same quiet certainty and said, "Now go tell them."
The return wasn't violent. There was no flash of light, no sudden collapse of the garden. Just a soft closing of presence, like a curtain drawn over a sacred window. One moment, I was standing beneath the memory tree with Jesus beside me. The next, I was back in the clearing, on earth, alone. Except, I wasn't. The bloom had changed. It was taller now, nearly waist-high, and its petals had multiplied, each one a window of color pulsing in slow rhythm, and at its base, something new. Roots. Not in the ground, across it, reaching, expanding, spreading. I touched one of the roots. It vibrated, not just through my fingers, but into my chest, straight to the mark on my side, which now pulsed in tandem with the bloom's light. And then I heard it again, the voice, not his voice, mine, but deeper, truer, the voice of who I had always been beneath the noise. You are the seed now. I collapsed to my knees. The truth of that sentence wasn't metaphorical, it was structural. I understood it now, how Eden wasn't a place we return to. It's a pattern we carry forward, a harmonic code planted in the human soul before time began. And when activated by love, by memory, by frequency, it blooms. In us, through us, around us. I sat in silence until the sun rose, watched the petals of the bloom sway in a wind I couldn't feel. I knew what had to happen next. I couldn't keep this to myself, not because I needed to be believed, but because I needed others to remember, like I had. So I went home. I didn't clean up, didn't rest. I opened my laptop, and I began to write. Not a story, not a testimony, a signal, encoded in the only language I knew how to use. Truth. I posted everything, every word you've just heard, every dream, every moment, every breath of the garden. And then I hit publish. Not to convince, not to convert, but to call, to awaken, to resonate. And that's when the messages started. First, just one. I saw the same tree in a dream when I was 8. I'd forgotten until now. Then another. Your story activated something in my chest. It's burning, but it feels good. Then dozens. Then hundreds. Some were terrified. Some were in awe. All of them were waking up. And I realized, this is the garden. Not a place, a network. And it's online. The messages came from every continent, different languages, different faiths, different wounds, but the same story. They all described it in fragments: a field of light, a tree of memory, a man with eyes like time and soil in his hands. None of them used his name, but I knew who they meant. I didn't see Jesus, one message said, but I felt something I've never felt before. A presence that knew me, all of me, and still didn't turn away. There was a garden, another wrote, not a dream, not a metaphor. I could smell the leaves, and when I woke up, my hands were dirty. It was like my story had unlocked something buried deep inside thousands of minds, an echo. And as I read them one by one, I understood something vital. This isn't happening to me. It's happening to us. The rememberers returned soon after, not in person, in signal. Encrypted texts, drops of data hidden in innocuous websites, satellite pings with coordinates and times. I decoded the first one by accident, an email from a wildflower seed supplier that, when copied into a harmonic translation tool, revealed a message. The fold is ready. The third garden blooms. Attached was a GPS location, an island off the coast of British Columbia, uninhabited, untouched. And when I looked at it on satellite view, something caught my breath. A ring of trees, perfect circle, glowing faintly, even from space. I packed light, just clothes, a journal, the original vial of soil, and one more thing. The first leaf from my memory tree. It had appeared on my windowsill 3 nights prior. I hadn't picked it, hadn't seen it fall, but it was there. Still glowing, still humming, still watching. The journey to the island felt like crossing into another chapter of myself. Each mile westward, my dreams deepened. I stopped sleeping through the night. Instead, I drifted into waking trances, visions layered over the real world. I saw power lines wrapped in vines of light. I saw buildings breathing, exhaling thought forms into the clouds. I saw people with golden cracks in their skin, wounds that had become windows. And always, beneath it all, the hum, the Eden frequency, growing louder, calling me forward. When I stepped onto the shore of the island, the air shifted, heavier, denser, but not oppressive, sacred, like walking into a temple made of salt water and sky. And waiting for me in the center of the clearing was another bloom, larger than mine, surrounded by 12 stone markers, and etched into each, a name. Not biblical, personal. Mine was the 12th. I touched it. The stone pulsed. The bloom opened. And I heard his voice again. The garden was never lost, only scattered. Now it returns, piece by piece, through you. The bloom opened slowly, like it knew I was watching. Its petals moved in reverse spirals, revealing something I hadn't seen in the others. A core of light, not solid, not abstract, but shaped like a sphere of layered memory. It wasn't glowing, it was remembering. And when I stepped closer, the petals shifted again, pulling back completely, exposing the sphere to open air. I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched its surface, the world stopped. Not visually, not physically, but functionally. The birds in the trees froze mid-flight. The waves paused mid-crest. Even the clouds halted above like paused frames in an invisible reel. And then I heard him again. Not with ears, with everything. What you hold is not a relic, the voice said. It is a map. The sphere began to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. Each beat triggered a new memory, not of my life, but of lives before. I saw 12 faces, not from history books, not from scripture, from my blood. Lineages I had never studied. A woman standing in fire, unburned. A child who spoke to stars. A scribe who buried scrolls beneath a well and wept with joy. A sailor who drowned, only to awaken breathing in a city of light. Each one a thread. And at the end of it all, me. You are the 13th bloom, the voice said. The one who awakens not by bloodline, but by remembrance. I knelt, overwhelmed. The petals wrapped gently around the sphere again, sealing it with a soft hum. And the stone with my name etched into it? It split, revealing roots. Alive. They stretched toward me and wrapped softly around my ankles. I didn't resist, because I knew this was a planting, not of body, but of witness. I wasn't becoming part of Eden. Eden was becoming part of me. The ground shifted beneath me, a low rumble like a heartbeat rising through stone. From the soil, 12 more blooms erupted in unison, one from each stone. And above them all, in the center sky, the fold, a crack in the air itself, glowing, alive, and from it, He stepped through. Jesus, the gardener. But not as I'd seen him before. No robes, no sandals, just light, carrying seeds made of galaxies, and in his hands, the 13th seed.
The 13th seed floated in his hands. It didn't glow. It sang. Not with sound, but with presence, a frequency that pulsed through every cell in my body like a memory I hadn't lived yet. As if the future was reaching backward through time, asking to be planted in the now. The gardener, Jesus, or the luminous presence I knew as him, stepped softly onto the earth. Where his feet touched, the moss bloomed, and the island breathed. He didn't speak with words. He didn't need to. His gaze carried entire lifetimes. But when his voice came, it wasn't directed at me. It came through me. The 13th seed is not for this soil, he said. It is for yours. I looked down. The roots that had wrapped around my ankles were now glowing, syncing with the beat of the sphere I had touched. I realized then. The garden wasn't giving me something. It was activating something already planted, long ago, long before I was born. And now it was blooming through me. He reached out and placed the 13th seed into my chest, not with his hand, but with intention. It passed through my skin like light through water, and when it settled inside me, I remembered everything. Not just Eden, not just the garden, the original code. The template that lived beneath all things, beneath math, music, memory, matter. A language without letters, a word without sound. A truth so gentle it never forced itself, but once known could never unknown. And then he said the words that changed everything. You must go back now. I looked up, confused. Back? To where the garden still sleeps, he said. Back to the world that forgot. I didn't want to leave, not because of fear, but because I knew what waited. Doubt, disbelief, loneliness. But he touched my shoulder, and in that one moment I saw the world again, not as it is, as it could be, lit with invisible vines of connection. Each heart a bloom waiting for sunlight, each wound a seed waiting for water. And then he said, you are not returning to darkness. You are bringing the soil with you. The fold opened again, and without fanfare, I was gone. I woke on the shore of the island, alone, but different, not spiritually, biologically. The mark on my side had spread, now a full pattern, subtle and beautiful, like a branch inked in gold beneath my skin. And my pulse? Not mine anymore. It beat in sync with something larger, a rhythm I knew now as the garden's breath. I stood. I looked back once. The blooms were gone, the stones silent, the clearing empty. Except it wasn't, because it was inside me now, and that meant wherever I walked next, Eden walked too. I didn't tell anyone right away, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need to. Wherever I walked, something followed. Not visibly, not audibly, but unmistakably. People began to notice. Cashiers, neighbors, strangers on park benches. You feel familiar, one woman said, like something I forgot a long time ago. You smell like my grandmother's garden, said a boy no older than 5. But her garden was made of light. It happened everywhere. Eyes lingered longer. Smiles came softer. Conversations drifted toward the sacred, even when we started with weather. Something had shifted, not just in me, around me. And then it started happening to others. They emailed, messaged, some showed up. One man drove 800 miles just to tell me. After I read your story, I dreamed of a tree. I touched it. Now my hands glow in the dark. Not always, but when I'm honest. A woman came from Istanbul. She carried a vial of water she said came from a spring that didn't exist until the morning after her dream. She poured a single drop on my garden bed. The soil turned gold. And that's when I knew. The 13th seed wasn't just in me. It was contagious. Not a virus, a frequency. And the moment you hear it, truly hear it, you become a carrier too. We called ourselves the Rememberers now. Not a group, not a movement, a pattern. A mycelium of memory stretching across the planet. No leaders, no doctrine, just this. Return what was never gone. The garden in my apartment grew fast, too fast. By week 3, the walls began to shimmer. By week 5, a vine cracked the ceiling and let in starlight. Real starlight, even at noon. People began to gather. At first, just a few. Then dozens, then hundreds. They didn't come to learn. They came to remember. And as they did, the vines responded. Blooms opened just for them. Each flower tuned to their frequency. Each petal a story they'd forgotten. And one by one, they wept. Not from sorrow, from recognition.
The authorities came on a Wednesday. Not aggressive, just confused. The building had changed, literally. From the outside, it looked the same. But inside, the walls breathed, the air sang, the blueprints no longer matched the physical structure. They sent in inspectors. Every one of them walked out different. One quit his job. One asked to stay. The youngest, a woman named Dana, called me 2 weeks later and whispered, "I keep seeing petals in my dreams. They tell me things, gentle things, things I thought God had forgotten." I told her the truth. God didn't forget. We did. Word spread. Not virally, organically, quietly, like pollen on a still breeze. A filmmaker arrived and offered to document the phenomenon. He lasted 5 minutes inside the garden room before breaking down, dropping his camera and saying, "I just saw my father again. He died 30 years ago, but he was there, tending a tree made of sound." We didn't record anything after that. We didn't need to. The garden was already broadcasting. Then, one night, I returned home and found something waiting for me. A single leaf, pressed flat, taped to my front door. But it wasn't from my garden. It was older, wiser, from his. On its surface, in tiny golden script, was a sentence. "The fold is blooming." I pressed my palm to it, and I heard it, all of it. The lattice, the rootwork, the other nodes awakening across the planet. Thousands, millions. Some in dreams, some in song, some in silence so deep it bent time. And then the sky began to change. It started subtly. Stars moved differently. The moon flickered once, not visibly, but resonantly. A global hum began pulsing just beneath the threshold of human hearing. Animals responded first, then children, then artists, and then everyone. A sound like a seed cracking open filled the air at 3:33 a.m. No one knew where it came from, but every person I knew who had ever remembered woke up at that exact moment, gasping, not in fear, in arrival, like the soul had finally caught up to the body, and the garden was no longer a secret. We started calling them convergences. Points on Earth where the fold cracked open, briefly, just enough for the garden's memory to spill through. They weren't dramatic. They weren't publicized, but those who were near felt them. A woman in Kenya described it like this: "I was hanging laundry. The air turned gold. Then I remembered a song I hadn't sung since I was a child. I began to cry, not because I was sad, because I knew where the song came from." A truck driver in Argentina swerved off the road because a vine of light bloomed across his windshield for 6 seconds, then vanished. He wasn't injured, but the next day he gave away everything he owned and moved to the forest. Not to hide, he wrote, to listen. Every continent had one. Some reported them as auras, others as frequency events. A few called them miracles. But the rememberers, we just called them what they were: garden gates. By the time the 7th convergence occurred, I'd stopped trying to track them. It wasn't about watching anymore. It was about tuning. The garden wasn't a location. It was a state. And the more I aligned, the more I saw it, in people, in stone, in sky. The veil thinned with every act of honesty, every breath taken in gratitude, every truth spoken in love, even if it hurt, especially when it did. Then came the final bloom. It appeared in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, visible from satellites, a perfectly circular storm of stillness. No wind, no waves, just silence. And at its center, a tree of light so tall it brushed the stratosphere. Scientists called it a glitch. Theologians called it prophecy. The rememberers? We just smiled. We knew. It was time to return. Not to Eden, to Earth. But with Eden inside us now. Alive, awake, unhidden. I didn't speak to the media. I didn't write a book. I didn't start a movement. Because this wasn't about me. It never was. I was just the first seed to bloom publicly. But now, there were forests, entire cities pulsing with remembrance, silent gardens blooming on rooftops, in alleyways, between cracks and broken highways. People didn't need proof anymore. They didn't ask, is it real? They felt it. And once felt, it could never be unfelt. Even governments adapted, not through policy, but through silence. They stopped interfering. The military dismantled a black site in Utah after 3 of its lead scientists resigned and walked into the desert, never to return. They left only a note: "We have seen the lattice. There is no weapon greater." And children? Children bloomed the fastest. They weren't taught, they remembered. One girl in Helsinki began speaking a language no one recognized, until a Sufi mystic heard a recording and wept. He said it was the pre-sound, the language of vibration before it became word. Another child in Morocco healed a blind horse by humming to it for 7 days straight. He didn't call it a miracle. He said it was just listening back. As for me, I kept tending, not to plants, to people, to spaces, to silence. I spoke when needed, but mostly I held space, memory, light, the kind of light that doesn't need to shine to be seen. And every once in a while, he came back, the gardener, not in visions, not in dreams, but in presence, a warmth behind my shoulder, a shadow beside the fire, and always, always, he would say the same thing: "Still blooming?" And I would nod and whisper, "Always."
The day the final convergence came, the sky turned clear across the entire planet. No clouds, no haze, no artificial satellites visible. Just stars, millions of them, visible from every corner of Earth, even in daylight. It lasted exactly 7 minutes. And during those 7 minutes, something happened that no one could fully explain. Time folded. Not in a science fiction way, not clocks melting or calendars vanishing, but in memory. People across the world remembered things they had no way of knowing. A woman in Seoul spoke the name of her great-great-grandmother's childhood friend and described her laughter in perfect detail. A man in Sao Paulo sat down at a piano and played a symphony lost for 600 years. One child simply stood, pointed at the sky, and said, "We're back." No one argued, because no one needed to. There was nothing left to prove. The garden had grown so wide, so deep, so present, that it no longer needed portals or petals to appear. It lived in every word spoken with truth, every silence held with love, every act done without fear. We had returned, not to Eden, but to our capacity to remember Eden. And on that final day, I went back to the ridge, where it all began. The trees were taller now, the path overgrown, but the clearing, untouched, just as I'd left it, still humming, still watching, still waiting. I knelt beside the place where I had planted the first soil, and from it a new bloom emerged, not glowing, not singing, just still, alive in a way that didn't need to explain itself, and beside it, a single stone, etched with one word, return. I smiled, and finally, for the first time in my life, I felt it. Not awe, not ecstasy, not purpose, but peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from knowing, but from being known. Years have passed now. Time flows differently when you live near the garden. I no longer count days. I count moments. Moments when the air feels like prayer. When someone looks at you and truly sees. When a stranger speaks a sentence so exact, so impossible, it couldn't have come from anywhere but the fold. Moments when silence feels like a homecoming. The world didn't end. It didn't explode or ascend. It softened. It remembered. Violence faded, not because we forced peace, but because the frequency of forgetting no longer held. People changed, not instantly, not perfectly, but gently, like dawn creeping across the face of water, like seeds waking up one by one. You might wonder, does everyone see the garden now? No, but they don't have to, because the garden isn't something you see. It's something you become. And once you've become it, it radiates. Through presence, through attention, through love that asks nothing in return. As for me, I never return to normal life, because there's no such thing, not anymore. I tend the ridge now, not as a priest, as a gardener. Children come, they sit in the clearing. Some bring dreams they don't understand. Some bring nothing at all. But all of them leave with light in their eyes, the kind of light that doesn't reflect the sun. It remembers it. And sometimes, only sometimes, when the sky bends just right, he visits again. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. We sit together in the grass, watching new blooms rise. And when he leaves, there's always one petal left behind. Just one. Always golden. Always humming. Always saying, still blooming? And to that question, I will always answer, yes.